All right, guys. Today we are starting chapter 3. We're starting chapter 3 today, going over quadratics, our quadratic formulas and equations. We're going to be solving quadratics, but the first thing we're going to do is talk about factoring. And factoring is really just the opposite version of distributing. So the first thing we're looking at is distributing, multiplying through. Because if we look at these two here, y'all done these before, is we distribute this out. So if we multiply out, the first thing we're going to do is 4x times x. Because we'll multiply the 4 and the number in front of x, well, that's just 1. 4 times 1 is 4. And x times x would give us x squared. Next thing we're going to do is 4x times negative 3. Well, our 4 times negative 3 is negative 12x. Then we're going to do the same thing with negative 5. We're going to do negative 5 times x is negative 5x. And lastly, negative 5 times negative 3. Our negative times a negative would be a positive. And 5 times 3 is 15. Now at this point here, we're going to combine like terms. And our only two like terms are the negative 12x and negative 5. So we still have the 4x squared, but now our negative 12x minus 5x, negative 12 minus 5, to be negative 17 plus 15. Questions on this here? Because this is just doing our distributive property. Y'all done this before. It's just been a little bit. Because we'll look at it again. We could do the other one. We'll multiply through by the 4x first. So we'll do the 4x times x first. Work this through. So as we look at this here, we're going to do with 4x times x first. Well, 4x times x is going to be 4x squared. Then we'll do our 4x times negative 4. Our 4 times negative 4 would be 16x, negative 16x. Then we'll move on to the next term, our negative 4. We'll do negative 4 times x is negative 4x. And lastly, negative 4 times negative 4 is going to be plus 16. Then we'll need to combine like terms. So we'll still have the 4x squared. Our negative 16x minus 4x. Negative 16 minus 4 is negative 20x plus 16. And that's our final answer. It's getting it into the standard form, our ax squared plus bx plus c. Now the rest of this lesson is going to focus on not so much going from factored form to standard form. We're going to be taking it back from standard form to factored form. We're going to be going the other way around. So we're going to skip the bottom of that page. Factoring. Ax squared plus bx plus c. Previously, you factored polynomials of the form ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is 1. To factor polynomials of other forms, where a is not 1, the first thing we look for is a greatest common factor and go from there. So our first step in factoring is to find a greatest common factor. Our first step in factoring is to find a greatest common factor. So, if we look at this here, this first problem, which is lower on the page, we want to factor 5x squared plus 15x plus 10. So the first thing we need to be looking for is a greatest common factor. Is there a number or term that can go into all three? 5 is a factor of 5x squared, 15x, and 10. So the first thing we can do is factor the 5 out. Now when we factor something out, really what we're doing is taking that factor and dividing everything in the expression by that term. So when we factor 5 out of 5x squared plus 15x plus 10, we're really dividing all three by 5. And when we divide 5x squared by 5, the 5 simplify out, leaving us with x squared plus. The only way the signs will change is if we factor out a negative. That factor out a sign with it. We move to the middle term, 15x divided by 5. 15 divided by 5 is 3x plus 10 divided by 5 is 2. So that's step number 1. Step number 2, we're going to write 2 sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. Our second step is to write 2 sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. We're getting it set up. We're getting the problem set up for factoring. So if we look at this here, we'll still have the 5. The greatest common factor of 5 will show up all the way to our answer. But next to it, we're going to write our 2 sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. This is setting us up for factoring. Questions on this so far? Does anybody have a guess at what step number 3 is? Solve. Now we're going to find the sign. We need to find the sign. We need to find the sign of what's going to go in these here. Because again, we're factoring this out. We're going back to our parentheses. The opposite of distribution. Oh, so you're just finding what was in it. We're going to find what was it to begin with. Yeah. Find the signs. Now there's 2 cases we can have. And the way we find the sign in the 2 cases is all based off the third term. If the third term is positive. And again, we're not caring so much focus on the number, but the sign. Is it positive? If the third term is positive, then the sign inside the parentheses, then the signs are the same. And match the sign of the middle term. So if the third term is positive, the sign that's going to go in both sets of parentheses will be the same, either both positive or both negative. And that sign will match the sign of the middle term. Well, the other case is if the third term is what? Negative. Then the signs are opposite. One's positive, one's negative. Doesn't matter which one, where we put the plus, where we put the minus, but one of them is going to be positive, one of them is going to be negative. Okay. So let's look at this here. We good to move back to the problem? So let's look at this here. So to find our signs, if the third term is positive, the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. If the third term is negative, our signs are opposite. So if we look at the third term, what's the sign of our third term? Positive. Because again, the 2 is not so much important. We're looking at the sign. The third term is positive. So the signs are the same and they match the sign of the middle term. And what's the sign for our middle term? Positive, which means the signs for both of our factors that go in both of these parentheses will both be positive. If the third term is positive, the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. If the third term is negative, the signs are opposite. Questions on steps 1 through 3? Are you ready for step number 4? Well, the fourth step is what? Find the factors of the first and third term. We can go on and put the last step. To plug in and check. Plug in the factors and check. To see if we... Plug in and check. Factors of the first and third term, then we'll plug in and check. So let's look at this here. So our first term for this problem is what? X squared. Well, what are our factors for x squared? What multiplies together to be x squared? X times x. I mean, there's only one other way that we can multiply two things together and get x squared, and that's 1 and x squared, but that doesn't help us for this here. So really, the only factors for x squared are x and x. And since it shows up in the first term, it'll be in the first spots. Really, for all these here, this factors of x squared, x and x, we can go on and just stick them in to begin with, because that's always going to be there. Factors of x squared of means first. Now, the only way it would be different is if x squared was where the 2 was, and not where in the first term. It was in the third. Then we put it in the third spots. That's the only real difference. All right. Factors of 2 are what? Yeah. 1 times 2. Are there any other factors for 2? No. So we'll stick those in. Because if there's only one set of factors, we'll stick them in. If there's more than one set, we just pick one of the sets of factors and plug it in. Now, you're probably noticing at this point there is a lot of guess and check with this. Now, with factoring, the more that you do of it, the more practice you get with this, the better you're going to get at it. That just makes sense. But a lot of the steps with factoring, a lot of the process with factoring, once you start doing more of it, you'll start seeing patterns with it. Which numbers are probably going to work better with different circumstances, or how the numbers come out. So we know which ones are more likely to work. Now, the last step is to check. And that's why we don't have to focus too much on which one's going to be right, which one's going to be wrong, because we're going to check it to make sure we factored it correctly. Now, according to the textbook, we factor the whole thing out, but I'm not a complete big fan of it, because there's some that I don't find necessary. X times x is what? Well, where did we get the x times x? They were the factors of what? Factors should multiply back together to be what we got, yes? So x and x are factors of x squared. That should multiply together to give us x squared, yes? Well, that's where we got it from. 1 times 2 is, well, where do we get the 1 and 2 from? The factors of 2, yes? I don't ever check those because, again, those are the factors of x squared and 2. We got them from the first and third term, yes? The term that I always check to try to make sure we have is the middle term, because we get the middle term for this here from our x times 2 and our 1 times x. These here, these are the ones we're going to check, because depending on the factors of the first and third term can cause the middle to change. First and third, not so much. So if we check this here, x times 2, x times positive 2 is positive 2x. We can put plus 2x, or we can just leave it as 2x because we're just checking here. And the other one is 1 times x, which is 1x. And 2x plus x is that the middle term we started with here? Yes, we're not looking at the top because that's with the factor of 5, but we're looking at the factors for our x squared plus 3x plus 2. Now, since that gave us the correct middle term, this here factored is 5 times x plus 1 times x plus 2. And that's it. Questions on this here? We're ready for the next one. All right. Step number 1 is greatest common factor. Is there a greatest common factor between 4x squared, 32x, and 16? 4. Because if we divide 4x squared by 4, we get, well, x squared. The next thing we're going to divide is 32x by 4. Well, we'll still have x because we're not dividing by a variable. The x will stay there. 32 divided by 4 is 8. 16 divided by, or 60 divided by 4 is 15. So if we factor the 4 out, we get this here. And again, that factoring of a number, we can try it by dividing all of them. Calculator, we can use a calculator to make sure it works. Because if it divides into all 3, then it is a greatest common factor. If it doesn't, then it's not. Questions on step number 1? Yes, sir. Then we move on to step number 2. If there is no greatest common factor, there is no greatest common factor. No, because getting rid of the greatest common factor helps us with the process, especially with step number 4, because finding the factors of the first and third term. Now, 4x squared, x squared, there's going to be x and x. That's the only way we can get x squared, yes? But with the starting 4x squared, well, my factors for 4 would be 1 and 4 or 2 and 2. That's fine. We have more factors because in the one that we have now, we're looking at just x squared. So it's just 1 and x and x. There is no other terms. Okay, so we went from 2 possible factors for the first term to 1. Yes? We'll have to do 15. I'll write it down here. Because our factors for 15 are 1 and 15 or what? 3 and 5. Okay. Because I'll write this here. X squared is x times x. I'm just listening it for the sake. Because our 1 and 4 would be really x and 4x, 2x and 2x. So we went from 2 factors to 1. 60 is what we started with. Well, that'd be 1 and 60. 2 and 30. 3 and 20. 4 and 15. 5 and 12. 6 and 10. 7 does not work. 8 doesn't work either. But by factoring that 4 out, the third term went from having 6 sets of factors to 2. Yes. So do we see what happens? By taking out that factor of 4 out of all 3 terms, we decrease the number of factors from 2 options for the first, 6 to the third. Third term, 2, 1 and 2. It makes it easier to factor if we have that common factor. If there is not one, then we have to work with all of them. Does that make sense? Yeah? So if there's a greatest common factor, we'll want to factor it out because it's going to make life easier for us. Step number 2. 2 sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. There's one main reason I write the 3 spaces, and that's to give myself enough room. Third term. So we go with steps 1 and 2. We need to find the signs for step number 3. If the third term is positive, the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. If the third term is negative, the signs are opposite. Here, the third term is positive. So the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term, which is also positive. So we have plus and plus. No questions on steps 1 through 3. We'll look at step number 4. Find the factors of the first and third term. Well, our first term is just x squared, so we would have x and x. That's the only set of factors, so we'll just plug them in. Factors of 15. We have 1 and 15 or 3 and 5. 3 and 5. And the last thing we can do is check. No real reason to check x times x because that's still just x squared. Or 3 times 5 because that is indeed still 15. Our x times 5 is positive 5x. Our 3 times x is positive 3x. And our 5x plus 3x is 8x. And that is the middle term we wanted. So our final answer is 4 times x plus 3 times x plus 5. Thank you. It would not. Now, I'll go on and use 1 and 15 to see what would happen. Now, part of the reason I say I don't check the first or third set of terms because x times x is still x squared, yes? 1 times 15 is still, those still match up because those are the factors of the first and third term. Now, if we check this again, x times 15 would be positive 15x. 1 times x is going to be plus x, telling us it is 16x. So even though we changed that third set of terms, it still gave us x squared. It still gives us the positive 15. But instead of 8x, it's going to give us 15 or 16x. It gives us the wrong middle term. First and third term are still fine, but the middle term is the one that changes. Does that make sense? No? Okay. All right. Let's look at this one here. 4x squared plus 13x plus 3. Greatest common factor is 4, yes? No, there is no greatest common factor. There is no greatest common factor. No, because 4, 13's prime, 3's prime, there is no number that will go into all 3. So we do not have a greatest common factor. And that's fine, because there are a lot of them that will not have a greatest common factor. So we just move to step number 2. I will have to be careful. I try to remind myself to not skip 1, because a lot of the times we can look at most of them and see if there is a greatest common factor or not, for the most part. Because if we have a prime number 3, 5, 7. Any of these show up, we start just skipping that. But again, it's always good to check for it. So that takes us now to the third step. Find the signs. If the third term is positive, the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. If the third term is negative, the signs are opposite. Here, the third term is positive. So the signs are the same and they match the sign of the middle term, which is positive. So both of our signs in the middle of these are both going to be positive, plus and plus. Questions on this here? Now we need to look at the factors of the first and third. Our first term is what? 4x squared. Well, what's factors of x squared? X and x, yes? Are there any other factors for it? None that would be helpful. I'm just going to put x and x. Okay, factors of 4. 1 and 4, 2 and 2. 1 and 4, 2 and 2. Which one do we want to try first? 2 and 2. Factors of 3. Well, 1 and 3. Are there any others? Okay. You want the 3 in the first set of parentheses or second? Okay. And again, at this point, we're just trying to pick sets of factors, plug them in. Because again, the last thing we're going to do is to check. We're going to check, make sure we got the correct factors. And again, I'm not so much worried about 2x times x, because 2x times 2x is still 4x squared. 1 times 3 is still 3. Those don't change. 2x times 3. 2 times 3 is? Then we still have our x, and it is indeed positive. 1 times 2x. 3 plus 2x. And 6x plus 2x is 8x. Is that the middle term we wanted? No. So the first thing we could possibly do is switch the 1 and 3. Would that do anything for this here? No, because it'd still be 2x times 3 and 1x times x. Or 2x times 1. Doesn't really change. But that's mainly because the first two terms are 2 and 2. So we can switch out the 2 and 2 for 1 and 4. Where do you want to put the 4, in the first or second? We'll put it in the second. And we can try it again. X times 3 is 3x, positive 3x. 1 times 4x is plus 4x. 3x plus 4x is 7x. Is that the middle term we wanted? No. Well, we can flip the 1 and 3 this time, because again, it might give us something different. Because we don't have the 3 and 1. Let's try it again. X times 1 is x. 3 times 4x. 3 times 4x is plus 12x. And x plus 12x is that the middle term we wanted? And sometimes it'll take us more than one try to get there. Questions on this here? Are you ready for the next one? 3x minus 7x plus 2. Is there a greatest common factor between the three terms? No. And since there is no greatest common factor, we're going to go on to step number 2. Our 2 sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. Sign and the signs. If the third term is positive, the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. If the third term is negative, the signs are opposite. So here, what's the sign of our third term? Plus. Our third term is going to be positive, positive 2. So the signs are the same, and they match the sign of the middle term. And what's the sign of our middle term? Negative. So our signs are going to be both negative. Since the third term was positive, our signs are the same, and they match the sign of the middle term, so we would have negative and negative. And that brings us to step number 3, or step number 4. Find the factors of the first and third term. So factors of our first term is going to be the factors of 3x squared, yes? Well, factors of x squared, we only have one of them. It is x and x. Since it's in the first term, it goes in the first spots. Factors of 3 are what? Anything else? No, we can go and stick them in. Where do you want to put the 3? Second one. Now we could write the first one as 1x, or we can just write it as x, because 1x and x are the same thing. Factors of 2 are 2 and 1, 1 and 2. We only have one set, so let's just plug them in. Where do you want to put the 1? Where do you want to put the 2? 2 in the first, 1 in the second. Now that we have this plugged in, we're going to go on and check. So we'll do x times negative 1, which is negative x. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6x. Negative x minus 6x. Negative 1 minus 6 is negative 7x. Is that the middle term we wanted? So x minus 2 times 3x minus 1 is the correct set of factors for this here. Questions on this here? Questions on anything we've done so far? We're ready for the next one. So we're looking at 2x squared plus 7x plus 6, yes? I think there should be one in the middle. Or is that the next one? Yeah. Huh? Yeah. 2x squared plus 7x plus 6. Is there a greatest common factor between these three terms? No. There is in the first and third, isn't there? Factor of 2. But we can't factor it out because it's not in common with all 3. 2 sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. Third step, define the sign. If the third term is positive, the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. If the third term is negative, the signs are opposite. Well, the sign for our third term is positive. So the signs are going to be the same, and they match the sign of the middle term, which is also positive. So we have plus and plus. Questions on this so far? Factors of the first and third term. So we can look at the first term first. So we're looking at the factors of 2x squared. Well, the x squared we know is going to be what? X and x. We can go and plug it in. Factors of 2 are 2 and 1. So we just need to find a place to put the 2, yes? Which one do we want to put it with? Doesn't matter which. We can put it with the first or second. Either one works. If you put it with the first, you can leave it there. It just might look a little different. Then we need to find the factors of 6. Well, I think there's more than one. Yes, 1 and 6, 2 and 3, 3 and 2, 6 and 1. Out of these here, which one do we want to try first? 1 and 6 or 2 and 3? 2 and 3. Do we want to put the 2 in the first or the second? 2 at the second, 3 at the first. Or you meant the other way. Okay. I'll check this here because there's a good chance the other way is probably going to be the one that works. X times 2 is 2x. Positive 3 times 2x is plus 6x, giving us 8x. Is that the middle term we wanted? No. Now, there is something I want to draw y'all's attention to. Because if we had it set up this way and it worked, 2x and 2, 2x plus 2, is there a greatest common factor there? Yeah, there's a greatest common factor of, is there one to begin with? Well, no, we said there wasn't one. If there's not one to begin with, there can't be one in either sets of parentheses. 2x and 2 couldn't go together, because if they could, it means I could take that factor of 2 out and have it out front. We could factor it out. Okay. Let's switch them. 2 and 3. We'll check it again. X times 3 is, positive 3 is 3x. 2 times 2x is plus, and 3x plus 4x is that the middle term we wanted? We're ready for the next one. Four x squared minus 7x plus 3. Is there a greatest common factor between all three terms? No. So we'll move on to our second step, our two sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. If our third term is positive, the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. If our third term is negative, the signs are opposite. Well, the sign of our third term is positive, so the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term, which is negative. So both signs are negative. Questions on this so far? Our next step is to find the factors of the first and third term. So we're looking at the factors of 4x squared. Well, what do we know so far? One of them has to be x and x. Which leaves us with the factors of 4, which is 1 and 4, or 2 and 2. Which one do we want to try first? 2 and 2. Factors of 3. 1 and 3. Do we want to put the 1 first or the 3 first? 3, okay. And we can, bless you, check. 2x times negative 1 is negative 2x. Negative 3 times 2x. Negative 3 times 2 would be negative 6x. Negative 2x minus 6x is negative 8x. Is that the middle term we wanted? No. We could have switched the 1 and 3. Bless you. Bless you. And put 1 and 3. But that'd still be 2x times negative 3. And negative 1 times 2x, which is the same thing we had, yes? It's just the 1 and 3 are switched. So we'll need to switch out the 2 and 2, 2x and 2x. 2, 1, and 4. Where do we want to put the 4? In the first set of parentheses or second? Second. And we can check it again. X times negative 3x would be negative 3x. Negative 1 times 4x is negative 4x. Negative 3x minus 4x is negative 7x. Is that the middle term we wanted? So our final answer is x minus 1 times 4x minus 3. We'll stop here and finish this up tomorrow.